define this question of control and transparency, we have to know the rule to play games. I perfectly agree with you. And the question of empowerment of consumers and individuals. With this question of big data and consumer law, regulatory online platforms. So the rise of the digital platform economy is now an established fact. At the same time, the need to develop a regulatory framework governing the activities of online platforms is widely accepted here in France and more broadly in the EU, because of the position of these actors as powerful intermediaries forming inevitable gateways to the market. Yet, we still need to define the right regulatory approach, its reach and enforcement mechanisms. Doing this now is essential, most notably in regards to the promotion of fairness and transparency in online platforms. Today, I will analyze with you the recent reform of the French consumer law for the Digital Republic Act, adopted in the 5th of October 2016, so through these specific lines. We shall see that this reform is perfectly aligned with the work of all this symposium. And accordingly, I would like to thank the organizers, especially Florence Giselle, to associate me to this work. We can see now that our traditional regulatory tools are being challenged by the business model of online platforms. Indeed, there are several matters to address concerning the adequate regulatory approach to adopt in order to come to terms with the specifics of their activities. Because these traditional regulatory tools are outpaced by rapidly changing markets and increasingly short cycles of innovation. These new operators are characterized by the fluidity of their models. They move dynamically from a service to another within the same ecosystems, and because also of the difficulty now to apprehend data, which is central for the functioning of this platform. However, these difficulties should not lead us to hinder the initiative of this operator by passing poorly designed regulation, especially when considering the potential in terms of innovation and growth that their activity brings to bear. Therefore, a balance must be found between the need to protect consumers in the platform economy while still enabling this operator to thrive. That is the sense of the initiative of the French Digital Council. We have advocated for the adoption of a fairness principle regarding the activity of online platform within the law. According to this fairness obligation, every platform would require to provide consumers with fair, clear, and transparent information on their various activities and their impacts on consumers, and giving the means to check the veracity of their claims. The starting point of this proposal is the observation that digital platforms are gateways to informations, which they classify and editorialize using opaque algorithm systems. These systems function as black boxes, protected under trade secrets. Yet, these algorithms are playing a growing role in our economy and society as agents and tools of decision-making. Following the Council of States reports, the French Council of States reports on fundamental rights in the digital age, the French Digital Council has pushed for the adoption of this principle of fairness for online platforms, ultimately introduced in the French Digital Republic Act, reforming the consumer law. This new legislation complements the legal regime that previous reform has begun to develop since the Macron Act in 2015, which mainly focused on the collaborative economy. Additionally, the reform encourages the use of a soft law based on a dissemination of good practices to ensure the full effectiveness of this fairness principle imposed upon online platforms. With the aim to complementing this reform of the consumer law, other methods now of regulation to promote the fairness principle are being considered, and one of which is promoting inter-regulation between various regulatory bodies. What is ultimately envisioned here is a data-based regulation. In the scope of this talk, I'm going to explain this dual regulatory approach by first analyzing the provisions of this new consumer law between regulation and co-regulation, and then presenting the proposals of inter-regulation that will enable us to promote this data-based regulation. Let's begin with the first point, the state of a new consumer law and the consecration of a legal fairness obligation on online platforms. The Act for a Digital Republic changed the consumer law. First, it introduces a fairness obligation on the activities of every online platforms. Second, it promotes a soft regulation approach by encouraging the most important online platforms to adopt a set of best practices. Let's go through these 2 points to graft the implication of this new framework of the consumer law. And first, let me explain to you this consecration of a fairness principle on online platforms. The new act begins by establishing a legal definition of the platform as a category, that is to say, its legal regime. In fact, Article 111.7 of the new consumer law, exactly and extensively defines what a platform is, highlighting its distinctive features. It operates on multi-sided markets in which it enables and coordinates the exchange of goods and services, and this definition also includes platforms of collaborative consumption. It further states that these operators are subject to a transversal fairness obligation regarding their activities. This obligation is twofold, which enables it to take into account the different practices of these operators. First, it imposes on online platforms a general form of fairness obligation regarding their relationship with consumers. Thus, every online platform required to provide consumers with fair, clear, and transparent information, and specifically the terms and conditions on the intermediary service that it offers, and the listing, ranking, and delisting conditions of the goods and services to which it provides access. Also, on the existence of a contractual relationship, a capitalistic link or remuneration for benefits, as long as they influence the ranking or the referencing of content, goods, and services offered on the platforms. Second, it imposes on online platforms a fairness obligation regarding consumer review posted on their websites. Private standards, such as the AFNOR standard in France, have already regulated the use of these levers of the digital economy. But now, since the reform, their means of publication and treatment are framed by Article 111.7.2 of the Consumer Law. Let me make several remarks concerning the method following by the legislator to adapt the consumer law. First of all, there is like a paradigm shift, because up until the reform, the consumer law had apprehended the fairness principle only through a negative aspect. In fact, it only permitted to sanction unfair commercial practices, which has led to several rulings concerning platforms such as Uber and Le Bon Coin in 2015. Since the recent reform, the legislator intends to promote a positive obligation by imposing a fair conduct on platforms. Then you will notice that the legislator took a transversal approach for fairness by designing a regulation able to cope with all types of platforms, regardless of their specificities, whether they were, for example, social network or a marketplace. In this regard, this differs from the European Commission, which favors a silo-based approach, reasoning by distinctive legal problem. Yet, the French reform aims to adapt these legal obligations on all online platforms according to the nature of their activities. To do so, Article 111.7 refers to its implementing decrees, which are currently being finalized. They are announced for the end of March. We're still waiting for them. This should include different levels of obligation that will vary according to platform activities. Depending on the type of platform being considered and the nature of their activities, their obligation will differ. For example, a collaborating platform, search engines, or social networks. So we can see that the regulatory approach developed here is very much pragmatic. This transversal and pragmatic approach of fairness is also reflected in the other form of regulation encouraged by the Act for a Digital Republic. It's a soft regulation approach calling for the development and adoption of a set of best practices co-designed by market actors. Let's analyze now this promotion of fairness through a soft regulation approach, in fact, for a co-regulation approach. One of the most important innovations introduced by the Act for a Digital Republic on that point concerned the promotion of fairness through soft regulation. Most notably, it encourages platforms to engage in a co-design of the regulatory process, which would translate into a set of best practices to ensure the fairness of their activities. This is a part of a soft law approach under the control of the regulatory authorities. Thus, Article 111.7.1 of the Consumer Law entrusts operators themselves with the task of organizing the definition and the dissemination of best practices related to fair information for consumers. Specifically, the legislator wants to enjoin the most influential platforms to go further than the general duty of fairness imposed on all online platforms. We can make here 3 observations concerning this new mechanism. The first one concerns the scope of the proposal. Here you see that only the most important platforms are concerned, those in which activities exceed a certain number of connections defined by the implementing decrees. In doing so, the legislator intends to make this platform operator play like the role of virtuous leaders, and at the same time, it will avoid the introduction of high market entry barriers from new entrants. The second remark focused on the definition of these best practices. The Act states that it is only up to the platform operators to define and to disseminate their best practices. Whereas the initial draw law considered involving all the stakeholders in this process, for example, market actors, but also civil society organizations and consumer associations or members of public authorities. However, the assessment mechanism of these best practices is entrusted to the regulators. The competent authorities will be entitled to various prerogatives. First, a power to investigate and assess the best practices of online platforms. Second, a power to make the assessment public and to establish a list of platforms that do not respect their obligations. Here, you see that it's a policy of naming and shaming, well known in financial area that is clearly favored. Basically, it consists of putting operators that do not respect their best practices under pressure by reporting them to the public. Consequently, the reputational lever could be used here to promote fair practices by platforms. Ultimately, fairness could become like a competitive advantage. Building on the regulatory approach that we have seen, associating classic legislative regulation and co-regulation to promote this fairness principle for online platforms, other methods now of inter-regulation are being considered to reach this objective. Let's move on these inter-regulation projects toward a database regulation. These inter-regulation projects are based on a new regulatory philosophy which is now being promoted by the French authorities and refer to a more flexible and collaborative regulation. Under this new approach, regulators intend to leverage the power of platform users, civil society organizations, and more generally the crowd to guarantee the fairness obligation of digital platforms. This is the fundamental meaning of the proposal carried out by French Digital Council, which encourages the authority to rethink the institutional design of regulation. The idea here would be to create a citizen watchdog platform in charge of monitoring the fairness of online platform activities. More specifically, it would consist of making accessible through a contributive platform the information reported on this matter by, for example, Consumer Protection Association or citizens' internet participants, and also individual consumers, internet users, and even businesses. This platform would provide a reporting section, a visibility space for unfair practices by online platforms. On these websites, citizens could also exchange with each other about their experiences, download plugins and extensions to protect themselves from specific abuses of online platforms, and also provide their data for the development of retro-engineering tools that will make the nature of the algorithmic treatment that they have been subject to explicit. That is the goal here of this project. This would allow us to benefit from the emergence of a large and decentralized pool of expertise inside the digital realm. An expertise that is based on the wisdom of the crowd. This is a trend we already observe with users' recommendations and rating. A trend that provides individual users with the means to oversee and define the relationships they want to have with platforms. A trend that symbolizes user empowerment, which is the cornerstone of the new Act for a Digital Republic. It would therefore be possible to inquire into and to appraise platforms that are part of the digital economy in a fully transparent and public manner. The outcomes of such inquiries will have an impact of the reputation of those platforms and create an environment in which the practices of the most virtuous participants are put forward and praised, thus providing the latter with a competitive advantage. Moreover, this process would assist regulators in overseeing market participant behaviors, a task which at this time they struggle to fulfill on their own. Indeed, it remains extremely difficult for regulators to objectively account for all unfair, deceitful, and predatory practices on the market. These new sources of information could, for instance, help uncover discriminatory procedures or lack of diligence on the part of the platforms. Where are we with regards to those various propositions? The French Digital Council has mandated by the government to devise such a platform. It is still an ongoing process which requires the joint contribution, I'm nearly finished, of professional regulators, academics, and more broadly members of civil society. This effort has first taken shape as Transalgo, a project launched in December by the organism INRIA. It aims at creating a research-focused platform dedicated to algorithmic transparency by designing tools to examine algorithms and by promoting the creation of algorithms which are responsible by design. This marks an emergence of a new type of rule initiated by regulators such as the French authority regulating electronic communication and station, the ARCEP, which can be thought like a database regulation. It's the new approach of a platform state that, rather than devising regulation at the state level, it aims at leveraging and promoting the interest of the crowd to ensure compliance from the market. Many are now promoting these tools of inter-regulation to successfully access the challenges that have been brought by online platforms. And some even go further. They suggest that some regulatory concepts, like consumer rights, can be quantified to assess platforms' ethical standard. And we rejoin here the idea of that you explained at the beginning of this symposium. To conclude, we can say that this convergence of regulatory instruments combining rules, law, co-regulation and inter-regulation may provide platform operators with the incentives to adopt the responsible behaviors necessary for a sustainable development of the digital economy. Thank you.